Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG Show, episode 16. So, we're going to start today with the hashtag Biden's cognitive decline. It's what everyone is talking about, especially Dr. Jill Stein, who it turns out is a Russian agent, apparently. Everyone who disagrees with the elite is now a Russian agent. It's another example of the cognitive dissonance of the left, that these are the same people who seize any excuse to rail against McCarthyism, whilst dubbing anyone who disagrees with them as a Russian bot, a Russian agent, a pawn of Vladimir Putin. It's a story from Breitbart. Joe Biden argues with construction workers over guns. The Democratic frontrunner for president clashed with members of a key constituency on Tuesday. Former Vice President Joe Biden was visiting an auto plant under construction in Detroit when several of the workers wanted to talk about his positions on issues. You are actively trying to diminish our Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms, one unionist charged. You're full of shit, Biden responded. As another attempted to speak up, Biden ordered him twice to shush. I support the Second Amendment, the candidate countered. As Biden said he was going to take your AR-14s away, he pointed his finger in the man's face. This is not okay, the man said, creating a buffer between the finger and his face. Don't tell me anything, pal, Biden demanded. The worker continued to defend the Second Amendment and disputed Biden's interpretation of assault rifles. Don't be such a horse's ass, Biden said before he walked away. Yes, this is one of the clues of cognitive decline, is one's willingness to pick physical fights with people over trivial slights. Once again, Biden asked the man if he wanted to go outside, sounding more and more like a surly drunk in a bar. So Joe Biden says he supports the Second Amendment. As Andrew Sarabian points out on Twitter, he is lying. He is staunchly opposed to our Second Amendment rights. He literally bragged about how he's going to put Beto, gun confiscation, O'Rourke in charge of gun policy if he's elected. So, more on this. In November of last year, Breitbart reported Biden's support of a government-mandated Beto O'Rourke-like buyback of AR-15s, AK-47s, and other commonly owned semi-automatic rifles. I don't know whether this includes AR-14, which is a long gun which Biden invented today. During the first Democrat debate, Biden said, folks, look, and I would buy back assault weapons. We've already started talking about that. We tried to get it done. I think it can be done, and it should be demanded that we do it. And that's a good expenditure of money. Also in November, he was asked by CNN, so to gun owners out there who say, well, a Biden administration means they're going to come for my guns, Biden said, bingo. You're right if you have an assault weapon. The fact of the matter is they should be illegal, period. Look, the Second Amendment doesn't say you can't restrict the kinds of weapons people can own. You can't buy a bazooka. You can't have a flamethrower. AR-15s, AK-47s, and other rifles, which liberals describe as assault weapons, are in fact guns, and Biden has made it clear he is coming for them. The auto worker with the beard that Biden was quarreling with said that he had seen Biden talk about gun confiscation, and Biden seemed to disagree there was any such video evidence. He said it was on a viral video, and Biden says, oh, like all those other viral videos, clearly implying that some sort of deep fake process has been employed to make Joe Biden say things that he didn't actually say. Now, there were concerns expressed about Hillary Clinton's health during the 2016 election, and we all saw her get tossed into a van like a sack of potatoes. But in Hillary's defense, she had several good hours during every day during the campaign, whereas Joe Biden has no good hours during the day. Let's see. Let's go to Jill Stein's Twitter page. Dave Schwab tweets, now Twitter is refusing to let me like Dr. Jill Stein tweets about Biden's cognitive decline. Seems our corporate overlords are really hitting the panic button today. If they rig this election even more openly than 2016, get ready to Dem exit en masse. Now, Twitter announced a few days ago that it will no longer allow people to abuse old people on Twitter. Does this mean that one will be banned from Twitter for saying, okay, boomer? I mean, that's what you get when you grow old. I've had people on Twitter say that, I'm old, I'm ugly. Well, it's okay, right. Is that all you got? And that I'm going to die soon. Well, hopefully not, or, wishing for my death. But that's the price one pays for growing old, as I say. Jill Stein tweets, MSNBC is Fox for liberals. Russiagate is Benghazi for liberals. Return to normal is MAGA for Democrats. CNN, MSNBC, and other corporate media outlets are racing to spin Biden threatening to attack a Michigan union worker as a brilliant move. If anyone else did this, the headlines would say, campaign meltdown. The rich man's media is desperate to cover up Biden's cognitive decline. MSNBC desperately spinning Joe Biden threatening a union worker in Michigan as forceful but composed. Biden threatened to attack the man and said shush, shush to a young black woman who tried to intervene. Corporate media in panic mode to cover up Biden's cognitive decline. Oh, and we hear from Joy Reid, the woman who didn't know the difference between Slovenia and Czechoslovakia. She tweeted, okay, I'm not the only one who viewed the interaction this way. Biden in this clip was forceful but composed. Quite the opposite of what his foes have been depicting him as. What am I missing? Well, Joy Reid misses an awful lot. There's another thing about Biden that the media doesn't seem to want to talk about, which is his personal vanity. He had an early encounter with hair plugs, which didn't go all that well for him. But then he got a better job later on. And he's obviously had extensive plastic surgery to his face. How do we know that? Because he exhibits what's known in such circles as the Joker look, that the skin has been stretched so tightly over his skull that he resembles a cartoon villain. Jill Stein again, CNN is frantically spinning Joe Biden threatening a union worker in Michigan as a very good move. Biden called the man a horse's ass, asked him to go outside, expect full propaganda mode as corporate media tries to cover up. And let's see, for Twitter sleuths trying to find the origin of concerns about Biden's cognitive decline, here you go. The first people to sound the alarm about Joe Biden's cognitive issues were MSNBC hosts, Democratic Party officials, and Biden's fellow candidates like Castro, Ryan, and Booker. Yes. Julian Castro asked Biden, are you forgetting already what you said 2 minutes ago? Cory Booker echoed concerns about Biden's cognitive decline. There are a lot of people concerned about Joe Biden's ability to carry the ball all the way across the end line without fumbling. We had a similar situation in Canada in the 1990s, the 1993 election, I believe, where the Conservative Party ran a picture of Jean Chrétien, and it was titled, "Is this the face of a prime minister?" And Jean Chrétien famously, as Alan Fotheringham said, looks like the driver of the getaway car. But we were informed forcefully that we were forbidden to mock Joe Biden's looks, Jean Chrétien's looks, because apparently this was some sort of physical condition. Various causes, Bell's palsy was mentioned. I believe there were about 3 different explanations for why Jean Chrétien was so sinister looking, and I expect a similar campaign with Joe Biden, that apparently, oh, he suffers from a stutter. And this is to blame, apparently, for all of his gaffes. Now, why a stutter would result in a man confusing his wife with his sister is an interesting question, or forgetting his own policy on gun control. But no, the media is going to spin this as elder abuse, whereas, as others have pointed out, the real elder abuse is Joe Biden being in the race. Oh, so apparently Alyssa Milano is on board. And what does that woman do these days? Wasn't she famous about 20 years ago? And that's who you want on your side, Alyssa Milano. Actress Alyssa Milano gleefully reminded America why she is supporting Democrat presidential candidate Joe Biden by posting video of the former vice president's contentious debate with a Detroit worker over gun control. "That's bullshit," she quoted. "This exchange is why I endorsed Joe Biden for president. You have to be able to have the tough conversations with those who disagree with you." Yeah, tough conversations are one thing. But insulting and threatening people who disagree with you is quite another. Let's see. While we're talking about Hollywood celebrities, how about Patton Oswalt? What does he have to contribute? Comedian actor Patton Oswalt posted a tweet on Tuesday in which he imagined supporters of President Donald Trump dying from coronavirus. Here's his tweet, maggot. So you take the MAGA and you add a T, so it's like maggot, right? From dying from COVID-19. Why did the media treat Trump so unfairly? Of course, he is the same fellow who tweeted in December, quote, "The president is a stupid asshole, and if you voted for him, you're a stupid asshole, and if you still support him, you're a stupid asshole. Oh no, this tweet is going to make all the stupid assholes not like me. Wah." I've liked Patton Oswalt in the things that I have seen him in. The King of Queens, I don't know, it was not like great. I don't know, he was funny on it. I thought he was rather good on Justified. And the question I have for people like Patton Oswalt is, why do you want people like me to hate you? If you're going to write off half of the country, it wouldn't seem to be very good for business, or so it seems to me. But Patton Oswalt obviously, has a passion for justice or some such. I should mention before I forget that I've been told that there is an Amazon delivery that is out, coming its way towards me, so I may have to step away for a minute or two during the show. In more Biden family news, Hunter Biden to skip court appearance. He will no longer travel to Arkansas this week for a scheduled deposition in his paternity case, as he claims he has concern over coronavirus-related travel restrictions and his pregnant wife. Last Thursday, Biden was ordered to appear in court, but his lawyers told the judge he would be unable to attend. Too busy painting, I suppose. He doesn't have a job, so why he would be too busy to attend is an interesting question. Defendant requests continuance of the hearing as he is unavailable to attend due to his wife's due date in 2.5 weeks or less and risks involved with travel. London Alexis Roberts, a 28-year-old former stripper, sued Biden last May, alleging that he is the father of her 16-month-old baby, a fact since confirmed by DNA testing, and asked that he pay child support and cover her mounting legal expenses. Biden agreed to make monthly child support payments to Roberts in January. As Hunter Biden is set to skip his court appearance this week, his father, 77-year-old Joe Biden, remains on the campaign trail, although I see that both he and Bernie have canceled rallies in Cleveland. So, coronavirus. Let's look Let's look at the big board. What's happening there? Stock market, roller coaster day, as they say. The Dow up 4.9%, 1,167 points. Meanwhile, the VIX, or the Scaredy Cat Index, was down 13.2%. So apparently, this is all Donald Trump's fault. This is what the media is telling us. And of course, the media would not lead you astray because they're ever so disinterested and responsible. Tucker Carlson has become a critic of Donald Trump on coronavirus. He said on a show yesterday, people you trust, people you probably voted for, have spent weeks minimizing what is clearly a very serious problem. Though these people have good intentions as they say this, many of them anyway, they may not know any better. Maybe they're just not paying attention, or maybe they believe they're serving some higher cause by shading reality. His comments came days after President Donald Trump himself called into Fox News and, in an interview that lasted over 40 minutes, seemed dismissive of the outbreak. Trump suggested many people who have contracted the virus go to work and function normally, and in the following days lashed out at other outlets like MSNBC for covering the outbreak critically. It's just partisan politics, they say, said Tucker Carlson. Calm down. In the end, this is just like the flu. It's definitely not like the flu. As I said previously, I don't really have a strong position on this. Maybe it is going to be a very big deal. Maybe it isn't. We don't know that yet. And, I'm talking about North America. A typical story in Vanity Fair with made-up stuff about the White House that, as I pointed out before, the media holds two lines on Trump concurrently. One, that he's a bumbling oaf, and the other, that he is a sinister mastermind. Now, obviously, one man can't be both of those things, but apparently now he's back to being a bumbling oaf. According to Gabriel Sherman at Vanity Fair, ever since the coronavirus exploded outside of China at the end of January, Donald Trump has treated the public health crisis as a media war that he could win with the right messaging. But with cases now documented in 34 states and markets plunging, Republicans close to Trump fear his rosy assessments are fundamentally detached from reality in ways that will make the epidemic worse. He is trying to control the narrative, and he can't, a former West Wing official told me. Well, you see the dishonesty there. That he said that Republicans close to Trump. The first quote comes from a former West Wing official. So this former West Wing official is obviously not close to Trump. And of course, this raises the question, why would people close to Trump be giving interviews, even off the record, with Vanity Fair? No. There's been innumerable stories of this type and whole books written by people. Oh, here's the inside dope on the White House. Trump is a bumbling oaf, also a sinister mastermind. I don't believe a word of any of them. So, what is the recipe to save the economy from the shocks brought about by coronavirus? Well, Keynesian economics, apparently. CNBC reported that Trump pitched a 0% payroll tax for the rest of the year to combat coronavirus. The proposal would include eliminating both the employer and employee payroll taxes on Social Security and Medicare. There was also a discussion of making the payroll tax rollback permanent. A Social Security payroll tax is 12.4% on the first $137,700 of wages. It's officially split between employees and employers, although most economists consider the entire amount to be a tax on worker earnings. Self-employed workers pay the full amount themselves. The Medicare payroll tax is an additional 2.9% levy on all wages, also split between employees and employers with no cap. Top earners pay another 0.9% Medicare surtax. I remember when I lived in California, I was paying more in Social Security and Medicare than I was actually paying in income tax. So yeah, for most people, it is a big bite out of one's paycheck. This article explains that a temporary payroll tax holiday or even a permanent repeal of payroll taxes would not endanger either the Social Security or Medicare programs. The government could continue to pay for the programs just as it does today. The reduction in revenue could be made up for by borrowing, which the government can now do at the lowest rates that have ever been available. Alternatively, the government could self-fund the programs the same way the Federal Reserve currently self-funds its bond purchases in the quantitative easing and overnight repo programs, simply by crediting bank accounts with dollars not linked to a collection from the private sector. Social Security was supposedly bailed out a couple of decades ago. Recent reports that I've seen indicate that it's not healthy, and now they're talking about it not being funded by employers and employees. So they'll just borrow the money. Once again, I have to say, this money that's borrowed is never going to be paid back. There's simply too much. This from the Daily Mail: just stay calm, it will go away. Donald Trump tries to reassure Americans as he makes crisis trip to Capitol Hill for talks on emergency economic bailout, and National Guard are called in to fight coronavirus. We're prepared and doing a great job with it, the president noted, instructing people to stay calm about the spread and economic impact. It's really working out, he added. His remarks came as New York Governor Andrew Cuomo sent the National Guard to New Rochelle to enforce a mile radius coronavirus containment area in the Westchester County community with a large cluster of cases. Meanwhile, there are 240 more infections Tuesday in the United States, and the death toll rose to 28, while globally it topped 1,000 outside of China. So the numbers are still small, still very small indeed for a country of over 300 million. Now, an interesting story from Bloomberg. Seattle's patient zero spread coronavirus despite Ebola-style lockdown. The man who would become patient zero for the new coronavirus outbreak in the U.S. appeared to do everything right. He arrived January 19 at an urgent care clinic in a suburb north of Seattle with a slightly elevated temperature and a cough he developed soon after returning 4 days earlier from a visit with family in Wuhan, China. Yes, it is the Wuhan virus, and this disease was brought to us by China. Whether it's an accident or whether it came from a lab, we don't know, and I don't know, probably will never know. In any event, the 35-year-old had seen a U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention alert about the virus and decided to get checked. He put on a mask in the waiting room after learning about his travel. The clinic drew blood and called state and county health officials, who hustled the sample onto an overnight flight to the CDC lab in Atlanta. The patient was told to stay in isolation at home, and health officials checked on him the next morning. The test came back positive that afternoon, January 20th. The first confirmed case in the U.S. By 11 p.m., the patient was in a plastic-enclosed isolation gurney on his way to a biocontainment ward at Providence Regional Medical Center in Everett, Washington, a two-bed unit developed for the Ebola virus. As his condition worsened and improved over the next several days, staff wore protective garb that include helmets and face masks. Few even entered the room. A robot equipped with a stethoscope took vitals and had a video screen for doctors to talk to him from afar. County officials located more than 60 people who'd come in contact with him, and more developed the virus in the following weeks. By February 21st, he was deemed fully recovered. Somehow, someone was missed. All the careful medical detective work, it's now clear, wasn't enough to slow a virus moving faster than the world's efforts to contain it. In February, firefighters in Kirkland, Washington, which is a ground zero for coronavirus in the United States. It's a suburb of Seattle with a large Asian population. Firefighters began making frequent visits to a nursing home where residents complained of respiratory problems, evidence of continuing transmission that burst into public view a week ago when officials announced the first in a series of deaths at the facility from COVID-19. A similar situation in North Vancouver, in Lynn Valley, in fact, where I lived for several years, where an old age home has become a hotbed of coronavirus. This seems to be a disease which kills the elderly, and indeed the very elderly. So in Seattle area public officials, this is according to the Seattle Times, are at the ready to start ordering involuntary isolation and quarantines and are considering cancellation of major public events. Patty Hayes, the director of public health for Seattle and King County, outlined potential next steps in the area's effort to slow the spread of the virus at a Seattle City Council meeting, and said officials are talking about what to do. Let's see, let's look at the 5 steps. Level 1, increase hand washing and alcohol-based sanitizer. 2, respiratory hygiene, cough etiquette. Keep distance from others, more than 6 feet. Frequently disinfect surfaces, doorknobs, faucets, phones, etc. Remain home if sick. Level 2, which is where Seattle is now. Voluntary isolation of those sick, voluntary quarantine of those who have interacted with those sick. Level 3, involuntary isolation of those sick. Involuntary quarantine of those who have interacted with those sick. 4, order cancellation of major public and large private gatherings, order closure of schools, childcare facilities, workplaces, and public buildings. And level 5, restrict non-emergency travel outside of the home, establish a cordon sanitaire, a guarded line preventing anyone from leaving an area infected by a disease. Well, you know, if it gets up to level 5 in significant parts of the United States, this is going to lead to, at the very least, a recession and quite possibly depression. From Politico, travel slump worsens as airlines try to blame media. Airlines blamed the media for exaggerating the effects of the coronavirus Tuesday, urgently broadcasting that they are open for business as travel continues to slump and new numbers suggest the worst may be yet to come for the industry. In a statement Tuesday morning, the trade group Airlines for America said that false media narratives have led to confusion and uncertainty across the country and argued that it's safe to fly, saying numerous health officials have affirmed that the risk remains low for travelers who follow CDC guidelines. But of course, there are all those travelers who are not going to be following CDC guidelines. And I think that is that's the problem. As I was saying yesterday, it could be that people are deciding, you know, do I really need to fly? Especially given what an unpleasant experience flying has become since 9/11. In Italy, according to Reuters, the streets are deserted as the country imposes an unprecedented coronavirus lockdown. Shops and restaurants closed, hundreds of flights were canceled, and streets emptied across Italy on Tuesday, the first day of an unprecedented nationwide lockdown imposed to slow Europe's worst outbreak of coronavirus. The government has told all Italians to stay at home and avoid all non-essential travel until April 3rd, dramatically widening steps already taken in much of the wealthy north, which is the epicenter of the spreading contagion. Our civic duty is the only thing that can save us, said Marcio Tonillo, 35, a teacher from the northern town of San Fiorano, which was placed under quarantine last month. Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte unexpectedly expanded the so-called red zone to the entire country Monday night, introducing the most severe controls on a Western nation since World War II. The move shocked many small businesses which feared for their future. It looks like an apocalypse has struck. There is no one around, said Mario Monfreda, who runs Larry's restaurant in a smart Rome residential area. Under the government order, all bars and restaurants will now have to close at 6 p.m. It is a total disaster, he said. This will reduce us to nothing. More people are going to die as a result of the economic crisis than this lockdown is going to cause than the virus itself. Well, it's not only Italy that is going to suffer. Because of this, it would seem that the coronavirus has the potential to break the European Union. And one wonders how long, say, the people of Germany are going to be content to pay for this make-believe globalist entity. And how, we've heard talk about banks, big banks such as Deutsche Bank, being in big trouble. Well, this is certainly not going to help. From the Daily Mail, government is working with Google, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to push NHS coronavirus guidance to top of searches to tackle misinformation. There was a rumor going around that you could, cure the coronavirus by sniffing cocaine and drinking bleach. Now, I suppose there are people stupid enough out there to believe that one would want to drink bleach at any time for any reason, but I suppose this is one of the rumors that they are talking about. Yes, I mentioned Alberta yesterday, the province where I lived for 5 years in the 90s. Alberta is in big trouble now. It's already been in serious trouble for years because of the earlier collapse of the oil price. And as I said yesterday, it's not just the Alberta economy that's in serious trouble. The Canadian economy is in very serious trouble now. With the stunning drop in global oil prices, the Calgary Herald reports, pushing crude down by more than $10 on Monday to $31 a barrel, Alberta and the country will be lucky to avoid another punishing downturn. It's like we're already down on the ground and now we're getting this, said Bob Geddes, president of Calgary-based Ensign Energy Services, the country's largest driller. I'm just waiting for the Bow River to turn red here to top it all off. For Alberta, another player caught on the sidelines of a bigger turf war, the fallout could be significant. It harkens back to the collapse in crude prices 5 years ago, which triggered layoffs and brutal spending cuts. It also kickstarted what the provincial budget recently called the longest recovery from a downturn on record in Alberta. Yet, it's not just an Alberta phenomenon that's unfolding, but a Canadian one as well. The energy sector accounted for 11% of the country's GDP in 2018, and more than 269,000 direct jobs, as well as billions of dollars in revenues and royalties for the government. Alberta's economy was projected to grow by 2.2% this year, but that's not going to happen. Matthew Stewart of the Conference Board of Canada said oil will likely remain below $35 a barrel until at least May. And a few years ago, when I was writing about the oil business, it was effectively, like $40 was the cutoff, that very few companies could make any money selling oil for less than that. Indeed, the one-two punch of coronavirus and an oil price war makes it difficult to see a meaningful economic turnaround with so many unpredictable geopolitical and economic factors falling outside the province's and the country's control. Jason Kenney, the premier, said economic fragility combined with a global recession and a collapse in prices constitutes a profound challenge for Alberta and for Canada. Cenovus Energy reacted swiftly to developments by cutting its capital program. The Calgary-based producer announced it will reduce its planned capital spending this year by around $450 million, or 32%. They can't make money at $30 in oil, said Geddes. We have a hiring freeze and we have a capital freeze across our company that we just initiated this morning. Generally speaking, if you have top quality oil sands projects, you are going to be among the best protected of oil producers in the world to weather this storm, said Adam Waterous, CEO of Waterous Energy Fund. Well, it seemed to me that the oil sands were already in very serious trouble, even before this recent collapse in prices. I think that big things are going to happen in Canada politically, and soon. This country simply cannot withstand any significant political or economic trial because the unity is not there. So let's look at the chat. Dawn from Beyond. Everyone watch new YouTube video, World's Most Banned Cancer Researcher Investigates Coronavirus with special guest Judith Very Baker. Hopefully everyone has read Me and Lee. Canada's screening, etc., has been virtually nil. Trudeau is useless. Well, you know, screening is racist, and it's responsible for stigma, which, as we know, is the real serious disease. Ricky Bullock says, which begs the question of what exactly the purpose of the TSA, DHS, NSA security apparatus is. Okay. Is KMG in favor of fighting in hockey? I stopped following hockey about 20 years ago. I had been a devoted fan since I was a boy. The season lasts forever now. The Stanley Cup used to wrap up in April. Now it wraps up near the end of June. They're just too greedy. Also, they decided that the games weren't long enough. So they made the games longer with overtime. I am not in favor of fighting in hockey. It's a tradition, you know, but it struck me, let's look at basketball as an example. You have, you know, men, big tall men, some weighing up to 300 pounds, and they've got their hands and their elbows in other people's faces for the whole game. And yet fights are exceedingly rare in basketball. But a lot of people like fighting in hockey. I'm reminded that there were some deaths in college football in the 1920s. And it was seriously suggested that Notre Dame drop its football program and replace it with hockey. And someone pointed out, oh, so you think the solution is to take a bunch of Irishmen and give them clubs? And so they thought better of that at Notre Dame. Yes, John Miller says, I'm sure debt exceeds more for sure. The problem is that people apply gold standard mentality to the economy, so they start freaking out over the volume of debt. Well, you know, the debt is a very serious problem, I suppose, if you believe that it is going to be paid back, and I do not believe that it is going to be paid back. There's no particular will to pay it back, and everyone seems to have, you know, there wouldn't be this level of borrowing to begin with, and apparently there's going to be a lot more borrowing in the United States if people thought that they actually had to pay the money back. Let's see. You know, we hear that China has successfully dealt with this problem. Well, how would we know that? Because they're saying so? Extreme skepticism should be applied to any news coming out of China. Veronica Meadows, Respecter, says Patton Oswalt has become as much the picture of the cartoon hysterical woman as Chelsea Handler, Alyssa Milano, or Alan Barkin has. Yeah, it's a very strange thing that the whole world apparently needs to know what the political opinions of people in Hollywood are, and you should trust them because they play act for a living. So, what are we going to go to next? Oh, racism by other means. There's a column for the National Opinion Center by Glenn Pearson. He was a career professional firefighter and is a former member of Parliament from Ontario. He and his wife adopted 3 children from South Sudan, and they reside in London, Ontario. He has been the co-director of the London Food Bank for 32 years. He writes regularly for the London Free Press. This fellow is, I suppose, what you'd call a sort of traditional liberal, but we see how, you know, with competition from the progressives, that the liberals are forced to change their opinions. And apparently, this fellow is very excited by Ezra Klein's new book, Why We're Polarized. And polarization apparently is a bad thing. It effectively turns people's political presumptions on their heads, this book does. He challenges our thinking in ways that are provocative as well as researched. In doing so, he has ripped open conventional thought in ways that are exceedingly uncomfortable. One of his key assertions is that modern voters are more linked by what they hate than what they like. That connection has always been around, but now it has transcended the usual gathering themes of equality, human rights, and social inclusion. I see that he doesn't seem to have considered, why people are more linked by what they hate than what they like. Well, I'll explain. The reason is that our politicians are not trusted, that they say one thing and do another while lining their own pockets. It really is that simple. They work, especially in my country, to support the elite, and they couldn't give a toss about the rest of the people, except for their protected minorities who are, we are constantly told, our betters. He writes, you can spot this anywhere. The focus on what we are against has trumped everything else. So you see what he did there? Energized observers who previously only went through letters to the editor or writing politicians directly now have an open lane for their anger through numerous social media possibilities. Aw, you see what's happened here? Is that apparently, Joe Sixpack now can speak to the whole world, and we don't want to hear from a Joe or Jane Sixpack because they're simply not enlightened. This has multiplied individual and public angst exponentially and introduced to political and community life a vexation that simply can't be controlled. Public discourse without guardrails. And who is going to set up this public discourse? Who's going to put the guardrails around them? Why, people like Glenn Pearson, of course. And this is where we have to be careful, since a vengeful politics has the potential to undermine even the good things we have built over the decades. It's become increasingly clear that the true hot button issue in modern democracy has become immigration. Uh-oh. A mere 3 decades ago, we were talking about its importance to our domestic economies and civic diversity. Now it has become a threat, and populations around the world are in the process of rebelling against it. Well, you see, in my country, as well as elsewhere in the world, we were not told that our leaders intended to replace us with fractured foreigners. It just sort of happened. The importance of civic diversity, I don't recall people saying, yeah, this place is too boring. Everyone around here looks just like me. We need to import millions of people who don't look anything like me and don't share our culture at all, because that would be good for, I suppose, greater variety in ethnic food, perhaps. But as George Borjas has demonstrated in the United States, and the Fraser Institute has demonstrated in Canada, immigration is not an economic boon to either of our countries. Immigrants cost ordinary people money, thousands of dollars per capita every year. So this rising wave of populism opened the floodgates of animosity. At the same time, it spoke of a democratic revolution and the power of the individual. Well, democracy means the power of the people. That's what it means. But to people like Glenn Pearson, democracy means wise people like him and his peers making decisions for us, and preferably, not telling us what those decisions are, because it might lead to unpleasantness. Much of this was understandable and at times legitimate, but it contained a Trojan horse that eventually unleashed a form of racism frowned upon only a short while ago. Well, it's a strange thing that until Canada's immigration policy was changed in 1967, largely the changes were modeled after the Hart-Celler Act of 1965 in the United States. Until that time, There was no racism to speak of in Canada. It's as if we were jealous of the Americans. They have a race problem. Why can't we have a race problem? Well, guess what? We got one now. And I suppose you could call it that, or you could call it diversity, you know? That, let's see, this infused traditional and social media institutions, corporatism, religion, and communities in a fashion that had no interest in democracy, but driving over everything in its path. What on earth is he on about? Suddenly, values such as social justice, gender equality, what does that have to do with immigration? Alleviation of poverty, and healing the planet were replaced by a kind of sloganeering that labeled such things as leftist socialism or centrist liberalism. Oh, healing the planet, that is in no way a slogan, is it? Okay, here's the money graph. Yes, it's easiest to spot in America, Russia, India, Saudi Arabia, and other places where totalitarianism has free reign. Oh, so the United States is a totalitarian country. It's funny, they seem to have an awful lot of elections with secret ballots for a country that is totalitarian. But it's unleashed powerful forces in France, Britain, Norway, Germany, and yes, Canada. Oh, and Germany. I wonder why that might be. Because Angela Merkel, Mutter Merkel, decided that, yeah, we're going to bring in a couple of million of, fractious Sunni Muslims into Germany. I'm not going to ask for your permission. I'm just going to do it because that's the kind of woman I am. And any unpleasantness that occurs as the result of this will be hushed up by the government, the police, and our compliant media. So ground zero for all the anti-immigrant ire has become politics. Again, was this translated from some other language? Parties that would never have been caught dead welcoming such bigotry now attempt to manage its presence at the party's fringes. Why? Because pent-up anger is a powerful political motivator and handled correctly could perhaps launch the party to power. Yeah, how about that? That political parties that promise to do things that people actually want to happen and promise not to do things that people don't want to happen, they become popular. And, we can't have that. Many across the globe came to believe that we were overcoming racism, championing human rights, and creating a unified humanity. One world. Is that what people want? They want one world run by a handful of people? That's not the way that I see it. But in any event, that language is still around, but rings increasingly hollow. We are discovering that in all that time, we felt that history was progressing, that there was a dark undercurrent of opposition that resented what they regarded as progressive dogma and bided their time to strike back. Wow, there's a very definite Soviet tinge here now. Their opportunity came as waves of refugees and quotas of immigrants moved around the globe. Racist forces suddenly saw their opportunity to create some havoc. No, yes, moving millions of people, bringing millions of fractious foreigners to our Western countries, that wouldn't create any havoc, would it? Oh, in only a short time, politics and political talk became toxic and divisive. And of course, partisan politics has never been toxic and divisive before. In the good old days, when, candidates didn't insult each other or make wild claims about them. Of course, that's never been the case. But you see, the left likes to pretend that, everything was so civil, in the good old days before Trump and Brexit. Of course, these are the same people who from the 1960s onward said that civility was stifling, that civility must be overcome. If you feel like saying it, say it. If you feel like doing it, do it. Because, that couldn't have any untoward consequences. What were politicians and their leaders to do? They wanted power, and the proven way to achieve that was to press for change. But this time, that change isn't about accepting refugees, but confining them in their camps of origin. It's about the call to limit immigration on the grounds of jobs being lost or different and seemingly threatening cultures challenging our institutions. One can be against progressivism without being racist, but the lines are becoming more blurred. I read that Finland has a new program, for the migrants. It's asking them not to rape. In that part of the world, this is rather old hat. In the mid-1990s, Norway announced a program. They had brochures and everything, and it was directed at newcomers in their midst. And it went something like this. We do not rape people in our country. Please take note of this, and thanks in advance. I would suggest that if we're bringing people to our country that need to be told that they are not allowed to rape people, then there are indeed significant differences between different types of people. Anyway, the peroration of Pearson's column, while we say we are looking for a better kind of politics throughout the West, what we're getting instead is racism by another name. Those millions of voters who resent the progressive experimentation of the last decades, is that how this was sold to us, as experimentation? Hey, we're just going to try something wacky here. And if it works, that's great. And if it doesn't work, you just introduced permanent, intractable problems through your experimentation. But of course, we weren't told that this was an experiment. We were told that everything would be great, that we would be much better off. And anyone who thought differently was, of course, a racist. Those millions of voters who resent the progressive experimentation of the last decades would rarely come out publicly and tell people of other color to go home. But they can instead vote for right-wing forces who voice racist messages for them. It's a deal with the devil that could eventually undo established democracy itself. No, it couldn't. And again, when people like this start lecturing you about democracy, you know from the get-go that they are going to be lying to you. Because we were never told, for instance, I grew up in Vancouver, spent most of my life there. We were never told that Vancouver was going to become a majority Asian city. Because if the people of Vancouver had been told this, they would have said, no, it is not. And we are going to vote you out of power if you intend to push that. But fortunately, Canada has been one of the few nations still struggling for the democratic theme. This is terrible writing. But the push to the extremes is now in our midst. Instead of caving into the pressure, our politics needs to come together to push back against the darkness of the past. Yes, saying that Canada should be for Canadians, apparently this is darkness from the past. I like reading stories like this because it shows that our elite is increasingly bewildered and afraid. Let's look at globalism. Were we told when globalism started to be introduced, say from the 1980s onwards, that it was going to mean for tens of millions of people in North America the end of permanent employment? Were we told about the gig economy? Oh yeah, benefits, you're not going to get any benefits. And expect to change careers 5 times in a lifetime. And, beans can be so delicious when they're cooked properly. And cheap chalupas, no. That came much later, when the elite began, rather shamefacedly, to speak the truth. In other words, you're screwed, peons, because it's more efficient our way. It's more efficient. Oh, yes, it increases the aggregate of wealth. Well, that's all very well when you're clawing back more and more of that wealth, and the middle class is being erased. And can you imagine that people decided they didn't want neoliberalism? If neoliberalism had been explained honestly from the beginning, it never would have been implemented. But Let's see, it was International Women's Day on March the 8th, a communist holiday, I never tire of pointing out. But you see that coronavirus has struck a mighty blow against feminism. Is there nothing that coronavirus can't do? Jennifer Ditchburn, who a few weeks ago effectively said that Canada is not a country, that it's been an illegal entity from the beginning. And these are the kind of people, who rise to top positions in the West now. She writes, if not for the coronavirus, there would be a woman's metropolis within the metropolis of New York this week. Its hotels and restaurants filled with the 12,000 civil society participants of the UN Commission on the Status of Women Conference. The Commission, however, has indefinitely postponed the event, which was also meant to mark the 25th anniversary of the landmark Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing and its declaration and platform for action. Yeah, the landmark Fourth World Conference on Women. This is the first time I'd ever heard of this, but I don't live in Jennifer Ditchburn's world where I'm constantly jetting off, helping, produce more carbon, jetting off to conferences to do what exactly? Basically, it's a paid vacation. What a shame, this postponement. The late feminist icon, Betty Friedan, said of the 1995 conference that the meeting was the message. That's perfect. The meeting is the message. So don't worry about the fact that this meeting is stupid and pointless. The meeting is the message. The fact that we got somebody to pony up, for 12,000 people to fly to New York and to be put up in hotels, well, that's pretty good. So you put together tens of thousands of women to agitate for change, and change is bound to occur within their global causes, but also for them individually, yeah, I'll say. And she talks about she was a journalism student back in the 90s, and she just had to go to this Beijing conference. And so she did. The conference was being held only 6 years after the Tiananmen Square massacre. China was a very different place at the time, and in the very early stages of major economic reforms. Oh, I see. You see, the brutal irony about a human rights conference being held in Beijing seems to have escaped Jennifer Ditchburn. Here it was, China welcoming tens of thousands of equality activists and also media from around the world. China was under the global spotlight in a way it had never been before, and we too were being scrutinized. Most of us were surveilled in some way during the conference and at the massive NGO forum on women of 30,000 civil society delegates that was held before the original conference. Okay, so they had a conference to prepare for the conference. Wow, nice work if you can get it. Apparently, conditions, it was muddy and unpleasant. Still, the energy at the forum was electric. There were women from every corner of the planet there, picking their way around puddles and collapsing tents to attend speeches and panels, and rallying behind those who had the most harrowing stories to tell of genital mutilation, domestic abuse, enslavement, wartime rape, and sexual orientation conversion therapy. Oh, really? That was a big deal? I don't believe you, Jennifer. One day on the morning shuttle bus from Beijing to Huao, I sat beside Betty Friedan, herself. Had it happened today, of course, I would have had a selfie. What a shame they didn't have smartphones back then. Other feminist celebrities were there. Gloria Steinem, remember her? Sally Field. She has Oscars. It was there that First Lady Hillary Clinton made her first major international speech. And what a day that must have been. I'm reminded that Betty Friedan, who I suppose is the godmother of this second wave of feminism, she got into very serious trouble in the 1970s when she complained that the feminist movement was being taken over by lesbians. And she did not think that, feminism and lesbianism should be conflated. And she said this was bad for the movement. Well, shortly thereafter, Betty Friedan made the first of many groveling apologies for her entirely accurate observation. Oh, let's see. There was who else was there? There was Regina Kami Shakakata of Zambia, who was a pioneer in getting women online in Africa. Oh, clogged inboxes wouldn't be a thing for many more years. And there's a picture of what appears to be that Burmese woman who won the Nobel Peace Prize, but now is a villain because she's engaged in ethnic cleansing there. Uh, this, the other photographs are captioned, but not this one. I guess they decided this was unfortunate. So 25 years later, at the Fourth World Conference on Women in February 2020, I find myself once again at a women's gathering, this time a leadership academy for women in the media put on by the Poynter Institute. Two very different contexts, of course, but in the end, the personal impact was similar. So the message is that we want more women to join a dying profession. Is that the message? How many conferences does this woman attend? And, you know, why? Why do they like conferences so much? Well, she explains, when women get together for professional, social, or activist reasons, there is an easiness and a feeling of empowerment. Perhaps it is because we spend much of our lives living within larger societal institutions that were originally built for men. Our legislatures, newsrooms, factory floors, universities, boardrooms, and offices. Together, we temporarily create a space that is resolutely ours and where we can imagine different ways of living and working. Within this space, we can hopefully also understand how race, colonialism, disability, mental illness, sexual orientation, income level, and religion specifically impact the trajectory of each other's lives. In these gatherings, we are seen. Well, I suppose you're seen by each other because no one else gives a toss. This term sexual orientation, these are weasel words. You know, if you mean to say homosexuality or alphabet people, then say it. In any event, I expect some tension there because, you know, in much of the world outside of the West, the trans movement is not very popular, to put it mildly. Oh, and she quotes Bella Abzug, who was a very noisy congresswoman from New York who was fond of oversized hats. This was a woman who also went to an awful lot of conferences. Let's see, Canada's own assessment of the progress it has made since 1995 notes a number of persistent challenges, including underrepresentation in leadership roles, the gender wage gap, and high rates of gender-based violence. Gender-based violence. There are new concerns, too, that women are being shut out of the new technology-oriented world of work. Well, I suspect that they're perhaps not all that interested in it, except, you know, as being, you know, evangelists. And being a JavaScript evangelist, perhaps. The gender wage gap doesn't exist for women with college degrees. As far as underrepresentation in leadership roles, women make up a small majority of the voters. If women were so keen to see more women in legislatures, we would have more women in legislatures. Of course, there's a very interesting experiment going on in Finland, where that country, for its sins, is now being led by a government made up entirely of millennial women. There's an interesting experiment for you. Let's see how that turns out. Despite all of this, Ditchburn concludes, I have to believe the imprint the conference made on the tens of thousands of attendees is important. Well, you would have to think that, wouldn't you? Otherwise, you would have to confess that you wasted your time and that the whole thing was a waste of time. Hopefully, once the threat of COVID-19 has passed, a new generation of equality seekers will be able to come together en masse for the UN conference. Sometimes it is in the act of gathering that we can both command wider attention, but also recognize our personal potential to affect change. Arthur Koestler wrote a novel. It was about people who go to conferences, who are constantly going to conferences. He called it The Call Girls, which is an amusing title. In other feminism-related news, the Daily Mail reports no more nagging wives. The Oxford English Dictionary has been redefining words like rabid and shrill because previous definitions were too sexist. The huge project was sparked by a complaint from a, wait for it, Canadian anthropologist. About 500 dictionary definitions have been overhauled over the last few years. Researchers spent 4 years analyzing tens of thousands of sentences to establish whether they unnecessarily perpetuated sexist stereotypes. The huge project was sparked by a complaint from Canadian anthropologist Michael Oban Reagan, who noticed the word nagging was followed by the example nagging wife. Where would anyone have got that idea? You see, the purpose of dictionaries is to define words as they are used. But now the OED, which is the most authoritative and respected dictionary in the world, has decided that they are going to define words as they believe they should be used. The adjective rabid, meanwhile, was followed by a description of a rabid feminist. Earlier this week, the leaders of Women's Aid and the Women's Equality Party were among those to sign an open letter calling on Oxford University Press to change its sexist definition of the word woman. The letter pointed out that synonyms for the word woman included bitch and maid. But yesterday, the OUP proved it had long been quietly challenging its own sexist definitions. One example was housework, which was previously followed by the example sentence, she was doing the housework. Well, they're trying to have it both ways because we are constantly being nagged at, if you will, that men are not doing their fair share of the housework, particularly in a situation of a dual earner arrangement. So if women are doing the majority of the housework, which, that seems to be true, then it would make sense, for an example, she was doing the housework. But again, she shouldn't be doing the housework, or he should be doing the housework. And so the Oxford Dictionary is now going to attempt to change people's behavior through language. Catherine Martin, head of language, content, and data at Oxford University Press, said it was important for the dictionary to be in line with political correctness. Did she really use that term? It's a mirror, and so it's really important that it be a reliable, trustworthy, fact-based repository of information about the English language. If there's a slur that exists, and it's widely known, leaving it out would misrepresent the reality of the uses of the language. That seems to contradict exactly what the OUP has done. Yes, we have made our dictionary politically correct, but it's still as good as ever. And no, we would never use language for political purposes. That would be wrong. So let's talk about Sweden. I guess I mentioned Finland earlier. I got a bunch of stories here from RT. Oh yes, it's Russian propaganda. Yeah, I suppose it is, but isn't the BBC British propaganda and Deutsche Welle German propaganda? Let's see. Don't like to see little girls in veils. Move out of Sweden. Muslim teacher and Muslim politician clash on live TV. Two Muslim women with opposing views on a headscarf ban in schools clashed in a fierce TV debate in Sweden. The teacher told the politician that people uncomfortable with the veil should just leave the country. In other words, it's our country now. The heated exchange between I can't pronounce this name, a school teacher in the Swedish municipality of Skurup, and local politician Lubna Sensaker Goransson was over a ban on veils in public schools, which Goransson and other council officials enacted in December. The decision angered many educators, and Ayesa We is among those leading the pushback. Move away if it annoys you. This is my country, too. Both women are Muslim and of immigrant background, but have opposing views on what the headscarf represents and whether it has a place in modern Sweden. During the debate, Göransson said people should not expect to come to a country that is secular and equal and live with medieval values. She sees the controversial piece of clothing as a tool of oppression and sexualization of little girls and not as a symbol of purity and goodness, as Aisa Wee does. The televised clash over the screw-up controversy was a microcosm of a larger debate over immigration in Sweden. The rapid influx of migrants put a strain on the country's welfare system and a surge in crime as ethnic gangs wedged their way into the shadow economy. There is also a strong sentiment among many Swedes that the newcomers have no intention of integrating culturally and would rather isolate themselves in their own communities than adopt the customs of their host. Now, clearly what they want is to change the customs of their host. And if you don't like it, you should leave. The screw-up headscarf ban was pushed by the right-wing anti-immigration Sweden Democrats Party, which used to be a political pariah, but saw a rapid surge in popularity over the past several years. Well, see, this was Glenn Pearson was writing about. Everything was just fine in Sweden, and then these evil people came along and said, we don't like the migrant policy. And guess what? They became rapidly popular. I was looking, trying to find demographic data for Sweden, and I discovered that, well, I don't know whether it exists or whether it's a closely held secret. Apparently, there are an awful lot of immigrants in Sweden, and the ethnic cohort is quite large, that the demographics of Sweden have been transformed in a really short period of time. One reads disturbing stories coming from the city of Malmö, which is the third largest city in Sweden. Let's look at the demographics there. 54% of the population of Malmö municipality had at least one parent born abroad. The Middle East, Horn of Africa, and former Yugoslavia and Denmark are the main sources of immigration. As of 2013, Malmö had the fifth highest proportion of foreign-born residents of any municipality in Sweden. Apparently, gang wars rage there constantly, with the police not becoming involved because large parts of the city are no-go areas. I remember reading that one of the members of ABBA, Bjorn or Benny, I forget which one, that his son, or one of their sons, had to leave Malmö after being mugged 3 times. And I'll just remind people that mugging is a cute word for robbery with violence. Yeah, Sweden is a great experiment they've got going there. There was an ad for SAS, Scandinavian Air Service, that came out a few weeks ago. And there were copyright violations when people put it up on YouTube, because the theme of the ad is that the Scandinavians didn't make anything, that they were just copying all of those wise foreigners, that there's no such thing as Scandinavian culture, and that they had a gap-a-tooth African talk about my Viking ancestors. And the reaction to this commercial was twofold. There was amusement and there was rage. And so SAS decided that no, we don't want people to see a commercial. In fact, you know, this was effectively a free commercial for SAS. We don't want people to see it because apparently people hate the message. Now, why an airline company would, first of all, seek to alienate its audience and then persevere with that policy after it became clear that the ad was a dud, well, I guess that's why they call it woke capital. Sweden is full. Head of Swedish Democrats goes to the EU-Turkey border to halt migrants before they set out. The leader of the anti-immigration Swedish Democrats is determined to discourage migrants right from the off telling them they shouldn't be counting on Sweden's famed benefits as the Nordic country is already full. Jimmy Åkesson traveled to the Turkish border city of Edirne along with his top aide, having in their sights people set to cross into neighboring Greece. While at the border, Åkesson and his entourage handed out leaflets discouraging migrants from making it into Sweden. Don't come to us. Sweden is full. We can't give you more money or provide any housing. Sorry for this message, the flyers read. He was also pictured talking to aspiring migrants, purportedly delivering his message in greater detail. Åkesson himself was impressed by what he saw at the border, telling Swedish media that something should be done urgently to stem the constant flow of migrants on their way to Europe. We need to provide support to Greece to secure the EU's external border, but also to maintain our own border in Sweden, he pointed out, adding that the EU border was tested and collapsed in 2015. This is more of a Trojan horse situation. Oh no, this is a crisis, we're being overrun. No, this is an opportunity, or crisis-opportunity, as Homer Simpson once said. And our final piece of Swedish news, Sweden's top migration officials has warned the country is a safe haven for war criminals and potential terrorists, as it gives passports and benefits to suspected dangerous criminals shielded from deportation by legislation. The Northern European country is remarkably welcoming to foreigners seeking refuge, but Sweden can reject an application on security grounds. The Swedish Security Service has the authority to deport a person it deems to be a threat due to suspected links to terrorism or allegations that the applicant has committed serious crimes. But ordering the deportation of such a person and actually enforcing it are two different things. Sweden doesn't send people back to countries where they may face persecution, torture, or the death penalty, so some folk are ordered to leave but cannot be forced to do so. Canada has similar provisions. It is exceedingly difficult to get rid of terrorists and war criminals. There was a fellow in Canada who had taken part in the storming of a El Al airliner, in which he took part in the massacre. And this fellow was ordered deported, and he stayed in the country for over 20 years after this. This was a murdering terrorist, and apparently we could not get rid of him. So in Sweden, while stuck in legal limbo, they are issued with temporary residency permits with all the benefits. They can work in Sweden, receive generous social benefits, and sometimes even get passports that allow free travel to other EU members. Other nations have a hard time understanding how we consider people dangerous, but still continue to give them passports and residence permits, said the head of the Swedish Migration Agency. Well, you know, it's a good question. This fellow, Mikael Ribenvik, says the current rules are unreasonable and result in Sweden being perceived as a safe haven for war criminals and potential terrorists. Well, it's not a question of simply being perceived. It is the fact that Sweden is a safe haven for war criminals and potential terrorists. And because they give these people passports, these people can export their terrorism throughout the whole of the EU, which one would think that, you know, other members of the EU would have a problem with that. Let's see, a record 122 people deemed a security risk were issued temporary residency permits in Sweden last year. Sweden is currently struggling to reconcile its traditionally liberal attitude to migrants with the surge of violent crime reportedly linked to gangs of migrants. Critics say the government would rather cover up such problems than be perceived as, wait for it, xenophobic. Yep. What's worse than terrorism? Xenophobia. What's worse than a killer epidemic? Xenophobia. It's the worst. It's the absolute worst. We don't want that. No, I don't think, you know, democracy, it doesn't match with xenophobia, or so our elite tells us. An interesting essay in the American Mind called Big Pimping by a person, presumably a woman, called Peachy Keenan. Let's see. She begins, it was the dreaded mom's night out at my son's exorbitantly expensive Montessori preschool. There were a few aged rock stars and insufferable lists B actors with children at this school, but that wasn't going to stop me from providing my firstborn with excellence in developmental education that mainly seemed to involve depositing smooth pebbles into various bowls using hand-hewn stone implements. We were just digging into pizza and our third bottle of Chianti when a stylish, glossy-haired mother of two started talking about her daughter, who was 3. In a voice filled with breathless anticipation, she described her plans for when her baby would enter the sexual marketplace. I just wanted to know she can tell me anything. As soon as she gets her period, I'm totally taking her to get on the pill. I just want us to be close. She turned to me. Have you thought about when you'll put your daughter on the pill? She asked. My daughter was 1 at the time. There aren't a lot of street pimps in the suburbs of America. We don't need them. We have affluent white female liberals, or AWFLs, as the internet calls them. The expression to turn out comes from prison and street hooker culture. Pimps turn out girls, turn them into prostitutes, and offer them up to customers. Getting turned out is what these bad boyfriends do to impressionable young girls. I only learned these terms from the blistering streetwalker documentaries HBO used to run in the early 2000s, before they discovered prestige rape drama. But the term fits exactly what middle and upper class families are doing to their daughters. They don't actually want them to grow up into hookers, but the end results are sort of the same. As the old joke goes, at least the women in the lucite pleasers and hot pants are getting paid for it. In January, former presidential candidate Elizabeth Warren, and just tragedy, she's no longer a candidate. Apparently, women need to be 2 million times better than men in order to get just as far. So she tweeted this: "You deserve better. Dump the guy who ghosted you, convince the roommate to let you adopt a dog, and I'll take care of canceling your student loan debt." In an exclusive video with Elle.com, Elizabeth Warren answers reader questions because, if you haven't heard, she has a plan for that. Jimmy Carter was mocked relentlessly, most notably by Dan Aykroyd on Saturday Night Live, because of his micromanaging. But not a patch on Elizabeth Warren, who's actually getting involved with relationship difficulties. Peachy Keenan says, "Woo, there's a lot of powwow chow to munch on here." Let's start with the fact that apparently there are so many women getting ghosted that they now constitute a demographic cohort big enough to be a presidential voting bloc, which is surprising because for the last 20 years or so, American girls have been raised from birth to be premium dating fodder, primed from the first whiff of puberty to be available for sex on Saturday night. So why are they being ghosted in droves, abandoned and left to die alone, clutching their pets and warned for president signs? You'd think these girls would be experts at snagging a mate. Years of sex ed, birth control pills, and permission to date early and often with no judgment from the grown-ups should have guaranteed they'd have suitors dangling from their every finger, lines outside the door, dates every night, so many engagement rings shoved under the nose they'd be blinded by the shimmering sight of all those diamonds nestled against black velvet. What happened? Munchausen by proxy. It's a mental illness in which the mother, it's almost always the mother, injures or sickens her own child on purpose for attention and sympathy. Grooming is a crime in which an adult nurtures a child over a long period of time to be open to receiving sexual advances. When it comes to sex ed, I believe in the screenwriting theory known as Chekhov's gun. If you show a gun in the first act, it must be fired by the third. If you show kids the sex toys, and worse, in the first grade, the sex toys will be used by high school. Recently, NPR published What Your Teen Wishes You Knew About Sex Education. In the article, we meet Electra, there's a warning sign, Electra McGrath, and there's some unpronounceable Polish name, which is the second half, who made a point of telling her 4th grade daughter, Lily, everything. She was very open from the get-go, even before those things I needed to know about. Lily came out as pansexual at age 12. At age 12. That's the 6th grade. Of course, we had Pete Buttigieg praising and making briefly famous a supposed 9-year-old gay boy during a campaign event. At an institutional level, we are creating a cursed generation of females expert at every imaginable permutation of sex with an infinite number of partners, while largely shunning the other thing, the main thing, the only thing still emitting any heat in the cold, merciless hearth of domestic life, the dream of forming a family. Because the shocking truth is no one wants to wife a sex expert. One reason American parents, mothers mainly, are rushing their daughters onto the pill or LARC implants, those are long-acting reversible contraceptives, is to make sure their offspring are not punished with babies in high school. I can't possibly stop her from doing what comes naturally, but I can temporarily sterilize her. Of course, I'm reminded of the actress Busy Phillips, who I was talking about yesterday. She has this great story about how she had an abortion at the age of 15 and how she is never going to stop talking about it, actually shouting about it, while doing weird, disgusting things with her tongue. I mean, can you imagine? We live in a world now that people actually boast about having abortions. There's that Chelsea Handler is another one. Oh, she gave a confessional interview a few years ago where she talked about her teenage abortion. And then we learned a little later that there'd been 2 teenage abortions. But I suspect that Chelsea Handler probably has a hybrid car, like Busy Phillips. So, so that's good. That worked out. Let's see. The schools do their part by forcing children into mandatory early sex education classes that often include graphic illustrations of sexual positions and expose even kindergartners to the infinite array of gender variants and sexual orientations newly discovered in the human genome. Condom demonstrations on bananas, that's so 1999. High school sophomores now know how to prepare each other's rectums for safe anal play, which is pitched as a zesty, natural activity for all genders. In 2019, California approved a terrifying dystopian new statewide curriculum that includes a 7th grade lesson that identified sexual activities such as bathing together and mutual masturbation as safe options to avoid sexually transmitted diseases. I don't know about you, but I'm always relieved when I finish preparing some organic, gluten-free, plant-based after-school snacks and discover my 6th grade daughter in the bath with her classmates. Because, it's much harder to transmit chlamydia in water than through intercourse. Bless you, Governor Newsom. When it comes to sex ed, I live by a very simple rule. If an adult who is not our pediatrician tries to talk to my child about their genitals, this person's kneecaps should expect to meet my crowbar. Normal adults do not wish to talk about children's genitals or discuss children having sex with children in front of other children. I thought about this. I had sex education in the 7th grade. They separated the boys from the girls, and we were shown films. One was called, I think, From Boy to Man, and the other one was called From Girl to Women. And I remember tumescence was described, and I started retching. And then for days later, I heard this line from the film, and I involuntarily started retching. After the films were over, they had a doctor in there, a very sinister man called Lyle Thurston. He later became an expert on trans, and a woman that I work with described a sad situation where her boyfriend, was depressed, and he went to see this Dr. Thurston, and Dr. Thurston diagnosed him from suffering from gender dysphoria, and that we see the problem is that you were actually a woman, and then he started having sex with his patient. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. In any event, after these films, one bright spark held up his hand and said, yeah, okay, but how does it actually work? Yeah, and then it was explained to us. And some of us didn't believe it. No, come on. That just sounds disgusting. Another story about the California curriculum included this. An 8th grade lesson on sexual orientation described hypothetical dating scenarios of teenagers. It gave an example of a 9th grade guy who has been attracted to and made out only with girls, but who fell in love with another guy and is in a relationship with him. The couple also date other people, but are both dating only guys. Hang on, are 13 and 14-year-olds even supposed to be in relationships with multiple people and genders? Aren't relationships reserved for grown-ups, or at least much older teenagers? If my middle schooler tried to talk to me about his or her relationship with some other pubescent dork, I'd laugh, ground them, and take away their Nintendo Switch. When I read about stuff like this, I'm always reminded of Christopher Lash's work, in which he explained how folk wisdom has been replaced by the teachings of so-called experts. Now, it is shocking to me that sex education actually got off the ground. That, yeah, some stranger, is going to talk to your kids about this stuff. Oh, and by the way, we'll try and keep this secret from you. Oh, you don't want your children to attend such indoctrination? Ooh, I don't know. That suggests you're a bad parent, and maybe, you should have your children taken away. Similarly, social workers going into people's homes and, studying babies and checking out their hand-eye coordination and asking questions, oh, how often do you read to your children? I don't know, this child is 3 months old. You'd think there'd be much point in that, but you don't talk to social workers like that because you could be in very serious trouble. I just, I have to think that the first time that this was tried, these social workers were literally chased out of people's houses. But such is the lack of respect for parenthood now, that apparently our children can be subjected to anything. Sex education, it doesn't work. When it was first made mandatory, it was argued that this would result in fewer teenage pregnancies, and in fact, it resulted in a huge increase in teenage pregnancy. Because essentially, sex education tells people that sex is fun, sex is enjoyable. Do whatever you want with whomever you want, but be responsible about it, which is going to lead to younger and younger people having sex. And since we teach kindergartners about this sort of thing, I suppose it's not surprising that we now have supposed 9-year-old gay boys to be anointed by Mayor Pete Buttigieg. I mean, this is all exceedingly alarming, but I've used this word experimentation on the show, and let's just try a huge experiment with children. Let's see if we can, break down their minds and then rebuild it in a progressive way. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? Well, it has been reported a lot in recent years that apparently sex is not particularly enticing for young people anymore. Certainly not in the way that it used to be. That there are the incels and there are the vol cells, and apparently large numbers of young people have decided to abandon sex or seeking sex. And, there's the internet. The internet can take care of that sort of thing. Let's see, this is not all theoreticals and jokes. I wrote recently about the tragic trajectory of Steven Spielberg's daughter, Michaela, who despite or because of her wealth and privilege has apparently chosen a career as a sex worker because, empowering. And of course, Michaela was arrested, a week ago, for supposedly assaulting her fiance, who was a 51-year-old man who was described as a professional darts player, but apparently is now an elephant trainer. I'm not making this up. Her story hits a little close to home for me. Years ago, some family friends, an upper middle class white couple, adopted 2 unrelated mixed race girls. One grew into a slim, silent, long-legged beauty. The other one was kind of chubby and fun. The pretty one, let's call her Maya, had modeling photos taken before she was 10. She would appear at various events in mini dresses, platform heels, and Kardashian-style camera-ready makeup. Every girl in her class is doing it, her mother would say when people asked. By 6th grade, boys were sneaking into her house at night through the window. By ninth grade, Maya was in weekly relationship therapy with her white acne-infested boyfriend who was 19. Other adults' opinions on the situation were not welcome, it was made clear. More pathologies and dysfunctions followed, including years of unsuccessful drug rehab, boot camps, and so forth, eventually arrests and disappearances. But no judgment, because judgment is harmful. Teens today are having less sex, fewer babies, fewer abortions. Zoomers are way more tame than you drunken, debauched Gen Xers. There is some truth to that, but according to the Guttmacher Institute, which is associated with Planned Parenthood, so it's not what you'd call a right-wing organization. In 2017, some 57% of 12th graders had ever had intercourse compared with 20% of 9th graders. In other words, it's still basically the norm. And 35% of sexually active female students were using a prescription birth control method. Between 2015 and 2017, the proportion of females in 12th grade who reported using a prescription method at last intercourse rose from 36% to 45%. Yes, I thought that the pill had become unfashionable because it has been linked to fears about strokes, but apparently not. Imagine being groomed from the age of 5 for a diverse, robust sex life with as many partners as there are stars in the sky without an end game in sight. It just is also strange to me because traditionally, parents have dreaded the onset of the sexual maturity of their children, both boys and girls, because of the obvious potential for disaster, many kinds of disaster. But now we have parents who are somehow glorying in their children's sexuality, even in anticipation of it. That is deeply, deeply depraved. Keenan writes, all of which leads us to a terrible existential crisis. Let's say you have a nice son in his 20s. He gets engaged. Despite all odds, he found the rare intact female with working reproductive organs. She even uses the quaint pronouns she, her. Oh, happy day. Now, would you prefer that your future daughter-in-law possesses encyclopedic knowledge of cutting-edge birth control methods and exotic polyamorous twister sex configurations, or no? Would it bother you to know she can describe in detail the pattern on the ceiling of the Burning Man orgy tent? Bluntly, how many sexual partners would you like your son's fiancée to have had? Is there a number you would find alarmingly high? The number I would prefer is 1, and my son would be the only name on the list, and it would be written in indelible forever ink on her heart. This is controversial, and the feminists get very upset. But there's a very strong negative correlation between the number of sexual partners a woman has had before her marriage and the likelihood that this marriage will fail. With women who were virgins when they were married, there is little divorce to speak of. When you get above 20, then divorce is pretty much taken for granted. But it's not just, cisgender stuff that they're talking about now. Forget drag queens reading genderqueer fairy tales to boys in Elsa gowns and their confused giggly mothers. That's so 2019. A public library in Maryland hosted a lesbian pole dancers teens-only sex ed class for 12 to 17-year-olds this month. Teens have questions about sexual health, whether it's birth control, lubricants, STI testing, alphabet people relationships, or something else completely. This will be an informal workshop where your teen can ask any sexual health question you want and get an honest answer. What happens when the 12-year-olds know more about sex than the most syphilitic Parisian madams of the 18th century? Does this ensure that they will marry young and well and be good and loving parents? Or is it more likely that this blasted knowledge guarantees a tedious multi-decade Bataan death march through dating apps, therapists, antidepressants, polyamorous cul-de-sacs, and eventually to a spiritual and biological dead end? Edward Luttwak wrote an essay. It appeared in Commentary magazine in 1995. And he was talking about the Unabomber and how the Unabomber, was obviously, criminal. But what he said in his manifesto was true. And Lutwak said that we are engaged in an experiment unparalleled in human history, which is people without families. Because it's obvious that the planted axiom in the New Style uh, birth sex education is that families. Why would anyone want a family? Families are constricting. Families take away people's freedoms, and they take away people's money. First there's the intruder in the womb, who becomes the intruder in the home, and you can't afford those nice things, and maybe you can't go out to restaurants as much as you would like. And, since maximum freedom is the highest value of our society, then obviously this works strongly against the natural desire of people to form families. Now, Luttwak pointed out that cousin relationships have pretty much gone extinct, which is obviously true, and there are increasing numbers of people who have no contact with their grandparents. I don't, Herbert Stein said, there are many variations on this. He said, systems continue until they stop. And, oh, yes, the trend now is more depraved sex ed earlier and earlier and earlier. This cannot be sustained because we can see the results of what happens to people, young people, when they come out of our educational institutions. They are profoundly damaged by them. And of course, there's nothing you can do about it. People are going to, they're going to find out. Yeah, why is it a good thing that they find out about these things earlier? Because this 9-year-old gay boy that Pete Buttigieg made nationally famous, surely there is no assumption that that poor child is having sex with anyone. Is there? Because that would be against the law. That would be a very serious crime. But you see, we are mainstreaming pedophilia. Why would you be telling 5-year-olds about this kind of thing if you didn't want them doing it? So, things that are unsustainable will come to an end. And I have to believe that this sexual madness will come to an end. But of course, the only question is how many people are going to be permanently damaged by it before it is brought to an end. Let's see. No more talking about the day of the pillow. That was my joke in 2016 about Hillary Clinton, and now I think I'm going to revive it about Joe Biden. One day we're going to be told that Joe Biden expired suddenly from a previously undetected respiratory ailment. Okay. For clearly, KMG took 3/4 of them. Oh, I see. Okay, I get what's that is about. Philip Daniel, is he in the chat? Someone says, Choco King 666 says, Philip Daniel, your music is very impressive. I used to have conversations with him on Twitter about music, but then he got kicked off Twitter, I believe. James Fountain says, how tragic that the most traumatic, damaging child groomers of all are their own mothers and educators. I was asking the question yesterday, what the hell happened with women? And again, this Munchausen syndrome by proxy, why are you getting involved in your daughter's sex lives before she even has a sex life? Why do you want your 14 or 12-year-old daughter having sex? Is there some sort of tingle, thrill that women get from this now? What sort of woman would buy a makeup case for her son, for her 7-year-old son, and tell the whole world about it? What sort of woman would announce to the whole world that their 5-year-old son is actually a girl and congratulate me for this? Oh, my son is so brave. No, actually, what you're saying is that you are so brave. Why do you want to change your boy into a girl? It's just, it is, it's absolutely depraved. But as I say, the good news is that it is not going to last forever. Octopus Knight says there's a war on love. Every perversion is promoted. Everything that is traditionally romantic is either demonized and maligned or else poisoned with inclusivity and diversity. I think this is another malign effect of sex education, is that children are told that, well, sex is fun. Every type of sex is fun and equally valuable. But on the other hand, you should only have sex with people that you love, which leads to an absurd situation where girls, sometimes little girls, work themselves into a fever saying that they are in love with some boy. And of course, they're not. And so when the inevitable breakup, or ghosting, as the kids are calling it now, happens, then this leads to extreme emotional turmoil for these poor children. So, what are we going to talk about next? Oh, yes. Let's talk about Kanye West. Can never get enough of Kanye West. Fury as Kanye West hymn service pushes out transgender show. That may be the most intersectional headline ever. U.S. rapper Kanye West was at the center of a storm Monday. Is he never not at the center of a storm? After a Paris show by an acclaimed transgender performer, a username available, was canceled at the last minute to make way for one of his religious services. I never saw that coming. For the last 15 years, we've all been told, that Kanye West is a genius. He's the greatest genius alive, perhaps the greatest genius who's ever lived. And then he married Kim Kardashian. And then he started holding religious services. Let's see, the mercurial singer. I like that. I've always promised myself that one day I would make up my euphemism list, the list of words that we use instead of asshole or crazy. Well, here's one: mercurial. Took over the Bourse du Nord Theater in the French capital for one of his famous Sunday service gospel hymn sessions during Paris Fashion Week. His wife, Kim Kardashian, turned up for the service in an almost sprayed-on latex brown suit, one of the 3 figure-hugging Balmain looks she wore during the course of the day. Yes, and that's exactly the sort of outfit that one wears to a religious service. But French trans performer Fia Menard was furious that her Maison Mère, mothership show, was pulled at just one day's notice to make way for the golden couple of American pop culture, claiming the audience was told it was canceled for technical reasons. Menard, one of the discoveries of the Avignon Festival in 2018, and we've never stopped talking about that, refused to take the news lying down, with her and her fans lambasting the theater and West as an imposter on social media. She accused the theater of lying so they could cash in on a religious ceremony and the money the Donald Trump supporting rapper could pay them. The 49-year-old juggler wrote on Facebook on Monday. A transsexual juggler. Menard says she felt that she had been treated with contempt. I am an artist, a trans woman, the director of a company, and I refuse to accept this denial and contempt, said the performer who transitioned in 2008. The Bourse du Nord told Agence France Presse that it canceled Menard's show because of the technical incompatibility of the 2 events. The 98 people who had bought tickets, obviously a hot ticket, were contacted, and most came to a show the night before while the rest were reimbursed. The theater, once the base of the legendary British theater director Peter Brook, dubbed the father of the fringe, insisted that its support for creativity, even at its most demanding, remains total. West is in Paris to show the latest collection for his Yeezy label Monday. The 42-year-old singer once dreamed of becoming the first Black American head of a major Paris fashion label. You know, he calls himself an architecturizer. Yeah, he does. Have you seen the shoes that he has designed? I suppose O.J. Simpson would call them ugly ass shoes, for that is what they are. But his friend and former fashion advisor, Virgil Abloh, pipped him to it in 2018 when the Off-White creator took over Louis Vuitton's menswear line. West was joined at the service Sunday by his wife, their daughter Northwest, and his sister-in-law Kourtney Kardashian, also dressed head to toe in latex, as one does at a religious service. Kim Kardashian was tied up and robbed at gunpoint of more than 9 million euros worth of jewelry during Paris Fashion Week in 2016. The haul included the engagement ring West had given her, which was reportedly worth $4.5 million. You know, making names, giving your children names which will subject them to mockery and ridicule, this was once looked down upon. There was a fellow called Bill Lear. He pretty much invented the private jet, the Learjet, and he pretty much invented the car stereo. He named his daughter Shanda, Chandelier. Get it? I remember reading about this and thinking, this is many years ago, and thinking, what an awful man he must be to do that to his daughter. But now we're supposed to believe that it is ever so cute to give your child some, dumbass name like Northwest. And I believe that subsequent children have even stupider names. But so we were talking about fashion icon, fashion leader, Kanye West, because he truly is a Renaissance man. And I mentioned Virgil Abloh, and you may not have heard of him, but I think you're going to hear about him. You're going to hear a lot about him, and real soon. The New York Times asks, is Virgil Abloh the Karl Lagerfeld for millennials? Many in fashion are horrified by the idea. That doesn't mean it's wrong. Virgil Abloh is the founder of Off-White, well, we knew that, and the menswear designer of Louis Vuitton, is the kind of fashion figure that seems to demand comparison. Almost every profile contains one buried somewhere in the text, or not so buried. He is the Andy Warhol for our times, says The Guardian. He is Jeff Koons, says Stefano Tonci. He is most often, and when no individual do, a Renaissance man. Yes, just like his good friend Kanye. While struggling to explain his ubiquity, this is his ubiquity, okay. Chesterton famously said that the purpose of the press is to write Lord Jones is dead to people who didn't know that Lord Jones had been alive. So, this guy you never heard of? Why, he's ubiquitous. Okay. After all, aside from his 2 fashion day jobs, here is a partial list of the companies and brands with which he has collaborated. Evian, that's a water company. They sell water. Nike, Vitra, IKEA, Champion, Equinox, Jimmy Choo, Sunglass Hut, and McDonald's. Here is a list of galleries and museums where his work has been shown and sold. The Museum of Contemporary Art, Chicago, Gallery Créo in Paris, Gagosian, and the Louvre. Here's where he DJs. Whoa, he really is a Renaissance man. Circo Loco in Ibiza, Jimmy's, with a Z, in Monte Carlo, Coachella, the Sub Club in Glasgow, and the Potato Head Beach Club in Ballet. The last comes up, highly recommended, the Potato Head Beach Club. Now, DJing. There's this woman, what's her name? Samantha Ronson. She's of that Ronson family. She was an item with Lindsay Lohan some years ago. And her brother, Mark Ronson, is a very successful record producer. Well, Samantha Ronson decided that she was going to get into DJing. Ooh, spinning those turntables. No, what she did was she showed up with an iPod and plugged it into the PA. And apparently that counts as DJing now. So when I hear that someone is also a DJ, I think it's not quite what it used to be. In any event, Virgil Abloh has lectured at the Rhode Island School of Design, the Graduate School of Design at Harvard and Columbia. But of all the comparisons that have been posited since Abloh landed in Paris Fashion Week 6 weeks ago and began his viral takeover, perhaps the one that gets the strongest reaction is a more fashion-centric idea. Abloh is the Karl Lagerfeld of the millennial generation. I've been saying that for a while, said Michael Burke, the chief executive of Vuitton, who hired Abloh in 2018, and previously, as chief executive of Fendi, worked with Lagerfeld for 9 years. But to pretty much everyone else in fashion, it's a blasphemous statement. Almost every time I suggested it to someone while chatting catwalk side during the most recent show season, which since early February has been moving from New York to London to Milan and now Paris, they blanched and said, "Oh, please no," or "That's crazy," or "Is this a joke?" Karl Lagerfeld, he was this old German with a ponytail and oversized glasses. I recall him as being outspoken and occasionally witty. I can't say that I pay very much attention to the fashion world because the fashion world has decided that it is going to celebrate ugliness. Old timers like me remember a episode of I Love Lucy. Yes, I am actually that old, although it's been playing in reruns, forever. Where Lucy gets greedy. She has a designer dress, and she starts bugging Ricky, her husband. She needs another designer dress. And so Ricky decides to play a cruel trick on her to punish her for her greed. And he has dresses made out of potato sacks. And he puts a designer label on them. And so Lucy and Ethel are parading around in these potato sacks. And one of them is wearing a champagne bucket as a hat. And the other one has another repurposed thing as a hat. And they look totally ridiculous. But I'm looking at something from Paris here. The supermodel Rome Stryd is wearing what appears to be a check patterned potato sack. And it has, in very large letters across the front, the legend Christian Dior, as well as the belt. It has a C and a D. Why would people pay thousands of dollars to advertise someone else's product? I recall being in a department store some years ago, and there was a woman, I suspect in her 30s, I guess. She was looking for T-shirts. Oh, well, the T-shirts are over there. These T-shirts don't have any names on them. You have to have a name on your T-shirt. How does that make it a better T-shirt? You feel the need to advertise someone's products all the time? And so eventually she was directed to DKNY. That's Donna Karan, New York. She paid 4 times what she would have paid, for a Hanes T-shirt to have a T-shirt that said DKNY on them. Well, such is the price of fashion. So we learned that Virgil Abloh has millions of Instagram followers. Okay, here we go. High fashion, after all, is famously white, set in its often old-fashioned ways, and yet desperate to appeal to a generation of consumers whom it suspects have a very different idea of what matters than the current establishment does. Abloh exploits tantalizingly, he is an African man, the promise of all that. People line up for what he is selling, even if they feel like what he is selling is a line, maybe because he is selling a line. We're into fashion talk now. There's a moment of reckoning with the world we have wrought in politics and technology and society. There is, And in many ways, the idea that it may be Abloh who has inherited the Lagerfeld mantle, that in profile, ambition, and reach, he occupies the same sort of mind/cultural space for the Gen Y and Gen Z consumers, and the social media aid that Carl occupied for those who came before, is simply a pointed reflection of the choices the industry has made when it comes to its own value system and place in the consumer mindset. I'm sorry, I'm slightly wrong about Abloh. He's a Black American. He's the child of Ghanaian immigrants. He studied engineering in college and then architecture at the Illinois Institute of Technology. And you may think that architecture, it sounds like a fun job, right? It's my understanding that very few architects are actually employed. It's probably even worse than journalism. So he worked with Kanye West for a decade and opened Off-White in 2013. His formal industry apprenticeship consisted of 6 months at Fendi. You see, I guess in the bad old days, before fashion got so innovative, people learned about it from the ground up. No. We don't want people who actually understand. They don't understand fabric. You don't need to understand fabric in order to design clothes. Let's see. Oh, he's the rare Black creative director of a French heritage house, which makes his position particularly freighted and unusual. So I was interested in his influences. So his influences come from architecture. Mies van der Rohe, Duchamp, Rem Koolhaas. Now, I thought, I've heard of that name, Koolhaas. He is a very trendy architect, a Dutchman. And if you go to Wikipedia, you will see a bunch of his disgusting buildings. And there is one in particular, let's see if I can find it here. It is an example of the style. Oh yes, it is De Rotterdam. And there are cubes stacked on cubes. There are 4 cubes stacked on 4 cubes, but they're off center, they don't join, right? They're asymmetrical. There's a popular trend in architecture now where architects deliberately design buildings that look as if they're about to fall on your head and crush you. This is a form of, psychic terrorism. How it is possibly, allowed and even acclaimed, well, I guess it's just the times in which they live. In the realm of self-branding, Lagerfeld had a signature look: powdered white ponytail, high collar, hill ditch and key white shirt, black fingerless gloves, black jeans. Abloh has a signature logo, the quotation mark. Lagerfeld was criticized for doing too much, a lot of it not well enough, as is Abloh. So far, Abloh has proved himself best as a designer when building atop a foundation established by someone else. Yeah, so why don't you take, a real designer design something and you put quotation marks around it. That's architecturizing. His Vuitton is more interesting than his Off-White, which often seems like a pallid copy of other people's ideas, just as Lagerfeld's Chanel was more effective than his namesake label. Abloh has been called out for copying a few times, something that never happened with Lagerfeld. Lagerfeld was called out for his entirely inappropriate statements about size and race, something that has not happened with Abloh. Well, that is good to know. So apparently he has no training in fashion, in fabric, and he's a plagiarist. He's a thief. Let's see, one of the things that most upsets fashion people about Abloh's rise is his propensity for fetishizing the shortcut. In The New Yorker, he called it the 3% approach, the theory that changing a design by that percentage is enough to make it qualify as new. At Harvard, he referred to it as his cheat codes. One has to admire Abloh's boldness here, because yes, I'm a thief. Yes, I take other people's ideas and change them 3%, perhaps with some question marks. You go around and you have question marks on your clothing, because that shows, I guess, what a critical thinker you are, because you got question marks on your clothing and you pay top dollar for a very indifferent thing, but it's got question marks. It's a Virgil Abloh. Andy Warhol was, I suppose, he was something of a scam artist. You know, the paintings that are credited to him, he made a lot of money doing portraits of famous people. Conrad Black has one. He took a Polaroid and then handed it off to an associate, and they basically reproduced that with bold splashes of color. But Andy saw it as a big joke. But I don't think that Virgil Abloh sees it as a big joke, and certainly the New York Times does not see it as a big joke. The New York Times seems to think that this is momentous stuff, actually. So let's take a final look at the chat. Oh, Lebanese Catholic beauties, Amy Yazbek and Marlo Thomas. Yeah, Marlo Thomas, she became a really big feminist in the 1970s. She divorced her husband and married Phil Donahue, who divorced his wife in order to marry her. She participated in this book. It was called Free to Be You and Me. I suppose it's completely forgotten now, but it was just a sensation in the 1970s. Philip Daniel says, I have an account on an IDW forum. I don't know what IDW is. Let's see. I had 2 lads and 1 girl, all grown up and flown the nest. I have 2 grandchildren. I worry for their future. It's getting weirder by the week everywhere, says Del Croix. Okay. I think I'm going to wrap it up here. I would like to thank everyone most sincerely for watching, for listening. If you like the show, any part of it, I would greatly appreciate it if you would subscribe to my YouTube channel. And if you would like to donate to the show, my PayPal address is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. I will be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. I hope that you all have a delightful evening. Good night.